So, when you break a bone, an X-ray gives you this really clean, basically binary answer.
Right, yeah.
You look at the film and you see that jagged white line fracturing the humerus or whatever, and the doctor just points at it and says, there's your problem.
It's super mechanical. You know exactly what you're dealing with right away.
Exactly. It's comforting in this weird way because the diagnosis is just, it's entirely visible.
The parameters of the failure are totally contained.
Yeah.
And like the protocol for fixing it is universally established. You put it in a cast, you wait 6 weeks, and the body does the rest.
But when a whole civilization starts to fracture, the X-ray machine is completely useless.
Oh, well, absolutely useless.
Right. Welcome to the deep dive. Because today, for you listening, we're stepping into a diagnostic landscape that is, well, it's incredibly murky.
Yeah, it's not as simple as looking at a broken arm.
Not at all. We're asking why some societies can endure just immense pressure, while others, which, look perfectly healthy and wealthy and powerful on the outside, just crumble into dust the absolute second a real stress test hits them.
Like a house of cards.
Exactly like a house of cards. And to answer that today, we are taking this highly analytical lecture from Tuli Islam, specifically Lecture 213.
Which is a fascinating one, by the way.
It really is. It dissects a foundational text, Surah Al-Hajj, specifically Ayat 11 through 21. But we have a very specific mission today.
We do. We are completely stripping away all the religious sentimentality.
Yes.
We are putting on the hats of, like, master sociologists and systems engineers.
I love that framing.
Well, it's really the only correct way to approach this specific analysis. Because the lecture treats this text not as, mystical poetry or some theological rulebook.
Right.
It treats it as a literal survival manual for societies.
So we are hunting for the absolute mechanics of civilizational collapse. There's no hype here, no preaching.
Just cold, hard sociology.
Exactly. We want to know what makes a society's foundations structurally sound and what guarantees its complete demolition.
And it's interesting because the text starts this diagnosis by pointing at the absolute weakest link in any human organization.
Yeah, and it's probably not what you'd expect.
Right. You might assume the text warns about, like, an invading army or a catastrophic famine or some massive technological failure.
Tell me the external threats.
But no. Ayat 11 points the finger at a completely internal variable.
An unreliable individual.
Exactly. The author of the lecture zeroes in on a very specific Arabic term used in this verse, which is harf.
Harf.
Yeah, so the verse essentially states that among the people is someone who serves the overarching system, the divine order, or the societal blueprint on a verge, or on an edge.
On an edge. I want to really sit with that for a second.
It's a great visual.
Because the exact diagnostic criteria for this person is that, well, if things are going perfectly well, if there is a tangible benefit or some good befalling them, they're perfectly content.
They play the part flawlessly.
Right. They show up to the meetings, they take the perks. But the moment a trial strikes, they turn on their face. They just vanish.
They're completely gone.
So let's map that onto a modern organization, because this isn't about someone having a crisis of faith in their private diary.
No, not at all.
In a systems engineering context, this is a catastrophic vulnerability.
It's a huge liability.
We are talking about purely transactional commitment.
Right, the fair weather participant.
Yes, but I feel like it's even more dangerous than just being a fair weather friend.
If so.
Because in a societal structure, you literally rely on the people around you to hold up the roof.
Oh, I see what you mean. The structural dependency.
Exactly. If I am building a community or a corporation or a nation, I assign roles based on the assumption that the people filling those roles are actually, present.
They're load-bearing.
Right.
Right.
But the person on the edge, the harf person, they are never fully inside the room.
They're standing in the doorway with one foot out.
Yes. They're waiting to see if the catering is any good before they sit down at the table.
And they're keeping their car running in the driveway, just in case someone asks them to help clean up the plates afterward.
That's the perfect way to put it.
Well, the lecture uses an incredibly sharp medical analogy here that actually ties perfectly back to your opening X-ray concept.
Oh, right, the tumor analogy.
Yeah, it diagnoses this specific demographic not as, like, weak believers, which is how it's usually translated.
Which is such a passive way to view it.
Exactly. Instead, it defines them as a no-sewer, a festering tumor, or a cancer within the social body.
Wow, that's aggressive.
But think about how a tumor operates within a biological system. It doesn't walk up to the body carrying a knife.
No, it hides. It mimics healthy tissue.
Precisely. It tricks the host into building blood vessels directly into it.
Just siphoning off resource.
It draws massive amounts of nutrients and oxygen and energy from the host body to sustain its own localized growth.
While contributing absolutely nothing back to the overall functioning of the organism.
It just takes. And these peripheral participants operate the exact same way in a society.
They show up to all the networking events.
They take the social safety net.
They leverage the prestige of the community brand for their own gain.
And honestly, they might even be the loudest voices in the room praising the system when the dividends are high.
Right, the loudest cheerleaders.
But structurally, if you push on them, they're completely hollow.
They just siphon the community's energy. And the real danger is when the community actually needs a return on that investment.
When the stress test hits.
Yes. When a crisis hits and the system requires its members to sacrifice some time or reputation or capital.
The tumor doesn't help fight the disease.
That tumor's just dead weight. It might actually be what kills you.
Yeah. The lecture introduces another really good physical metaphor to explain the sheer uselessness of this demographic.
The archery one.
Yeah. Picture a bow, perfectly good string, and an arrow.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
If you observe a person who operates purely on this transactional HARF mentality, they look like a fully assembled weapon.
The string is attached,
The arrow is nocked.
but there is absolutely no tension in the string.
None. The mechanism is fundamentally disconnected from any kinetic potential.
So you look at it from a distance, maybe from the vantage point of a leader taking inventory of their societal defenses.
And you check a box on your spreadsheet, right? You say, okay, we have one functioning archer.
But when the enemy is at the gates, that arrow cannot be fired.
It just plops onto the ground.
Let me push this analogy just a bit further.
Go for it.
Because the danger isn't just that the bow is useless. The danger is the false reliance.
Oh, the illusion of defense.
Exactly. If I am defending a citadel and I know for a fact that a section of the wall is completely open, I will adjust my strategy.
You'll funnel your troops there or build a barricade.
Right. I can manage a known vulnerability. But if I think I have a solid, structurally reinforced wall and it turns out it's actually just made of painted cardboard.
You are going to lean your entire defensive strategy against it.
And when the battering ram hits the cardboard, you don't just lose that wall, you lose the entire citadel.
Because you organized your reality around a complete illusion.
And this is exactly why the text is so aggressive toward the edge dweller.
They aren't just neutral actors.
No, they are active sabotage by way of false presence.
If a movement is staffed by opportunists, it possesses no actual core. It will just collapse under its own weight the second the friction of reality rubs against it.
And the ultimate tragedy here for the individual standing on the edge, that they actually think they are outsmarting the system.
Oh, they think they're geniuses.
They really do. The lecture points out that this person loses both this world and the next.
Because by refusing to fully commit their weight to any structure, they never actually participate in building anything of lasting historical value.
They are perpetually transient.
They spend their entire lives basically just renting space in the margins of other people's accomplishments.
And when the margins inevitably shift, they just fall into the void.
It's a sad existence, really.
That psychology is so fascinating to me. Let's dig into that for a second.
Sure.
Because the person on the margin, the edge dweller, they don't see themselves as a villain or a tumor or a cardboard wall.
No, in their own mind, they are playing three-dimensional chess.
Exactly. They think they are hedging their bets. They're thinking, why would I blindly commit my life and my resources to this one societal model?
I'll just take the benefits now, but I'll definitely keep my options open.
Right. It just feels like basic smart risk management.
It feels like rationality.
Yeah.
But the text violently deconstructs why this is actually a massive rational miscalculation.
The lecture contrasts this concept of harf the margin with a word that usually gets translated into English as faith or belief. The word is iman.
Right, Iman.
But again, for you listening, we are throwing out the theological dictionaries today. We don't care about the mystical definition.
About the structural definition.
Exactly. So how does the author redefine iman in a purely structural sense?
Well, the author strips away the concept of blind mystical faith entirely.
Completely gone.
Yeah. Iman actually shares an etymological root with the Arabic concept of peace, security, and protection.
Amun. So it's about safety.
Right. So in this structural framework, Iman is defined as a load-bearing conviction.
Load-bearing conviction.
It is a state of absolute structural integrity. When a society is built on iman, the individuals are deeply structurally bound to the overarching system.
So they are providing active security to the system.
Yes, and the system, in turn, provides macro security back to them. It is a conviction that has been tested and holds fast under immense stress.
So it's the exact opposite of the edge dweller with the darting eyes looking for the nearest exit sign?
Precisely. It's the person who says, I have examined the blueprints of this society. I understand the mechanics of why it works.
And I'm going to stand on this spot and bear the weight, even if the ceiling starts shaking.
Because they know the foundation is sound, they've checked the math.
Right. Now, contrast that with the rational error of the edge dweller, which is diagnosed so perfectly in Ayat 12 and 13.
Let's look at those verses.
They describe this peripheral person, once they inevitably flee the stress test, as calling upon what neither harms nor benefits.
And seeking a patron whose harm is nearer than his benefit.
So what's the structural physics of that?
Well, think about the physics of abandoning a structure. When the edge dweller flees a constructive load-bearing system because it suddenly demands a sacrifice.
Because they refuse to be load-bearing.
Right, they don't just float off into some zero-gravity void. Humans are inherently social creatures. We require systems to survive.
You always have to land somewhere.
You have to. But because their primary psychological driver is short-term, transactional gain and extreme risk avoidance, they make terrible long-term investments.
Oh, they panic buy into another system.
Exactly. They end up pledging their loyalty to systems or leaders or ideologies that are fundamentally powerless to actually protect them.
Or worse, systems that are actively hostile to human dignity.
They mistake exploitation for protection.
I want to map that onto a modern scenario just to really crystallize it for the listener.
Go for it. Let's hear it.
Imagine a massive hurricane is coming toward the coast. Category 5, a total monster.
Okay. High stakes.
And the local community has built this structurally reinforced concrete bunker. It's not glamorous inside.
Not go luxury suites.
Right. You have to do your share of the maintenance, maybe take a shift on the water pump, and there's a strict code of conduct to ensure everyone survives the tight quarters.
It requires load-bearing participation.
Exactly. So the edge dweller looks at that bunker and says, too much work, too much commitment. I don't want to do pump duty.
I'm going to look for a better deal.
Right. So they walk down the beach and they find this guy operating a pop-up tent, selling counterfeit insurance policies and cheap umbrellas.
Oh, man. I know where this is going.
And the guy with the tent tells them, hey, stand under my umbrella. No maintenance required, no pump duty. Just give me your wallet.
And in the sunshine, before the storm hits, that feels like a brilliantly efficient transaction.
It feels like a life hack. But when the Category 5 winds actually hit, that umbrella is just obliterated instantly.
The patron they chose, the guy with the tent, his harm is nearer than his benefit.
Yes. The edge dweller literally gave away their resources for a complete illusion of security, and now they are entirely exposed to the elements.
That is a flawless modern translation of the systemic error described in Ayat 12 and 13.
It's just bad math.
It really is. You place your bets on a corrupt, exploitative hierarchy because it offers a quick payout.
Or maybe the false prestige of, like, elite status?
Sure, but that corrupt system possesses absolutely zero structural integrity.
It's all tent poles and umbrellas.
So when the universal laws of cause and effect finally catch up and the hurricane makes landfall, that system cannot protect you.
It will collapse and it will crush you in the process.
And the lecture doesn't just leave this as some theoretical hypothetical. It brings in a massive historical case study.
To prove the mathematical superiority of load-bearing conviction over transactional numbers.
Yes, it points to the Battle of Badr.
And I love how the author analyzes this.
It's so refreshing.
It really is, because we usually hear about this battle as this purely miraculous, supernatural event where, like, angels intervene to save the day.
The lecture completely ignores that framing.
Completely. It reads Badr entirely through the lens of systems engineering, logistics, and sociological integrity.
So let's set the stage for the listener.
Yeah, paint the picture.
You have this newly formed community attempting to establish a radical new socio-economic order based on human dignity and equitable distribution.
A very new, very fragile bunker, to use our analogy.
Exactly. And they are forced into a military confrontation. Now, this group consists of just 313 individuals.
Just 313.
And they are poorly equipped. They don't have enough horses. They barely have proper armor or standardized weaponry.
It's basically a militia.
A poorly funded one. And they are marching out to face an established, highly funded, well-armed, and thoroughly entrenched army of 1,000 soldiers.
Soldiers representing the dominant exploitative power structure of the entire region.
Right. So if you are an edge dweller, if you're that peripheral participant running a basic cost-benefit analysis on an Excel spreadsheet, you hit the defect button immediately.
Oh, immediately. The math is undeniable. 3-to-1 odds against a technologically superior force, you run.
You negotiate a surrender. You betray your leader for a payout.
You go buy the cheap umbrella from the guy with the tent.
Exactly. But the 313 did not defect.
And the systems question is, why? How did a group facing certain physical annihilation hold their ground?
The author argues it was because there were 0 edge dwellers among them.
The margin had already been purged.
Exactly. The 313 were purely load-bearing walls. They possessed a command.
They weren't just tourists.
No, they deeply understood the universal principles of the system they were defending.
They weren't fighting for a quarterly bonus.
They were fighting for the very survival of a load-bearing reality.
And the lecture emphasizes the mindset of the leadership at that exact moment, doesn't it?
It does. The leader looked at those 313 individuals and realized that if this tiny group was wiped out, the entire structural blueprint for a just human civilization would vanish with them.
The stakes were absolute.
So mechanically speaking, let's ask, what happens when a system achieves 100% load-bearing conviction?
You eliminate internal friction.
Yes. Think about the army of 1,000. Yes, they had superior weaponry. Yes, they had the numbers.
But who were they?
Their ranks were filled with mercenaries fighting for coin, political opportunists fighting for status, and edge dwellers forced into the ranks through pure coercion.
Their internal friction was massive.
Every single soldier in that army of 1,000 was worried about their own personal risk.
They were all on the edge.
Exactly. So when the battle lines clashed, the army of 1,000 fractured along its internal fault lines.
Because there was no load-bearing conviction holding them together.
Right. The 313, however, operated as a single, unyielding block of titanium. They absorbed the impact because their structural integrity was absolute.
It's the difference between hitting a pane of glass with a hammer versus hitting a diamond.
That's a great way to visualize it.
The diamond might be way smaller, but its atomic bonds are perfectly uniform and unbreakable.
And so the force of the larger army basically shattered itself against the absolute conviction of the smaller force.
So if this load-bearing society visibly succeeds against all odds, if they actually hold the line at Badir, if they start building an equitable community where resources actually flow to everyone instead of being hoarded at the very top, you would naturally assume something.
What's that?
You'd assume the edge dwellers watching from the sidelines would realize their spreadsheet math was completely wrong.
Oh, right. You'd think they'd have an epiphany.
Yeah, you'd think they'd drop the counterfeit umbrella, walk up to the bunker, and say, okay, you guys figured it out. The foundation is real. I want to help build this.
You would definitely assume that. If human beings were purely logical, egoless machines.
Which, spoiler alert, we aren't.
We are not. But the text points out a completely irrational, deeply toxic reaction that occurs instead.
Envy.
Yes, when the marginalized opportunist realizes their spreadsheet was wrong, they don't experience a sudden desire to join and build. They experience pure, unadulterated envy.
And envy is a very specific kind of destructive energy. The text addresses this in Ayat 15, and honestly, the imagery used here is bordering on cinematic in its sheer absurdity.
It's so wild. Read it for the listener.
It says, whoever thinks the divine order will not make its cause prevail, let him stretch a rope to the sky, then cut it, and see if his scheme removes his rage.
I mean, just try to visualize that.
It's hilarious, but also profound.
It perfectly captures the profound impotence of those consumed by envy at a constructive movement's success.
Let's break down the physics of that metaphor.
Okay, so you have a society that is successfully building an infrastructure of human dignity on Earth.
The diamond we talked about?
Right. And you, the edge dweller, are so furious that this system is advancing without you and proving your cynical worldview wrong in real time that you essentially throw a massive tantrum.
You literally grab a rope, hurl it at the clouds, and try to hang yourself from it, or you try to climb it to cut off the sun.
You are just flailing wildly at the sky.
It's elaborate, it's spiteful, and it is entirely disconnected from the mechanical reality on the ground.
The lecture is essentially mocking the futility of this envy. It's saying, go ahead, expend all your capital, spend all your resources on these convoluted Byzantine plots to sabotage this constructive society.
Post all the angry essays you want, fund all the smear campaigns, lobby the corrupt politicians.
Spend your entire life fuming about it.
Exactly. But it does not matter. The social law advances regardless of your tantrums.
Your fury changes absolutely nothing about the structural reality of the universe.
If someone engineers a bridge correctly and it holds weight, your jealousy cannot somehow alter the physics of the bridge and cause it to collapse.
Because the constructive system isn't advancing based on magic tricks or PR spin.
It advances because it aligns with reality.
And the author brings in Ayat 16 here to really hammer that home. The text states that this system, this blueprint for society, came down as clear, examinable evidence.
The Arabic term is bayanat, right?
Yes, bayanat,
Yeah.
which is essentially the death of the mystery cult.
Ooh, I like that.
It implies transparency, rationality, and completely verifiable proof.
It's an engine of reason. It is basically an open source blueprint for a society.
Anyone can inspect the code.
Exactly. If an architect hands you a blueprint for an earthquake-proof foundation and you pour the concrete exactly to spec, the building will stand.
End of story.
But if your neighbor, who built his house out of mud and twigs because it was, cheaper and faster, gets furious when your house survives a tremor and his doesn't, his rage is completely irrelevant to the concrete.
The author is arguing that sociological laws operate with the exact same unyielding mechanics as architectural laws.
If you build a society on equity, mutual protection, and load-bearing conviction, it will withstand historical tremors.
And the edge dweller is fundamentally incapable of building. They can only ever be a critic.
Because building requires stepping off the edge, it requires taking a risk and bearing weight.
And when the builders inevitably succeed, the critics are left holding a severed rope, just choking on their own rage.
I think we see this dynamic play out constantly in modern sociopolitics.
Oh, everywhere. Corporate culture, politics, everywhere.
We see entire political factions, corporate competitors, or even just toxic individuals in our personal lives expending like 90% of their daily energy raging against an advancing reality.
They're stretching ropes to the sky, trying to pull down the success of others.
Rather than doing the quiet, unglamorous, difficult work of building a viable, resilient system of their own.
Because it's much easier to throw stones at a glass house than it is to learn how to blow glass.
That is so true. Okay, I want to zoom out a little bit here. We've been talking about the internal mechanics of a society. The edge dwellers, the builders, the friction of envy.
The granular stuff.
Right. But if this social law advances with such cold, mechanical certainty, how does it fit into the broader universe? Like, how does human society relate to, say, the solar system?
Well, this is where the lecture makes a profound philosophical leap, analyzing Ayat 18. It outlines what we could term the cosmic operating system.
The cosmic operating system. I'm intrigued.
So the verse lists the sun, the moon, the stars, the mountains, the trees, and the animals, and it says they all prostrate.
Now, to a modern, secular ear, that word immediately triggers a mental image of religious subjugation.
Right, someone bowing on a prayer mat.
Exactly. So how does an engineer read the word prostrate?
An engineer reads it as strict, lawful obedience to the governing system.
So no prayer mats involved?
None. The author strips away the ritualistic connotation entirely. When the sun prostrates, it is generating nuclear fusion according to the exact laws of quantum mechanics and gravity.
It doesn't decide to just take a Tuesday off.
No. A tree prostrates by executing photosynthesis. A river prostrates by flowing to the lowest point of elevation.
They are perfectly executing their designated function within a unified, universal system.
There is zero rebellion in thermodynamics.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The physical universe operates in a state of absolute, frictionless submission to its own operating system.
Exactly. But then, the verse points to humanity.
Yeah.
And it highlights a massive, terrifying anomaly.
Uh-oh.
Only a segment of mankind operates in harmony with the laws designed for human flourishing.
Because we possess the unique variable of free will, we have the capacity to break ranks.
We can choose to be the cancer cell.
Wow, think about that. A lung cell cannot suddenly decide to act like a liver cell.
It just can't.
But a human being can look at the social laws of equity, justice, and load-bearing conviction and say, no thanks, I'm going to build a system based on hoarding wealth and exploiting my neighbor.
We can choose to step completely out of alignment with the structural physics of civilizational survival.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there.
Pushback time.
Yes, pushback time. Because if I am a skeptic listening to this right now, I am immediately throwing a flag on the play. We agreed to treat these texts as engineering manuals, right?
We did.
Okay, well, if I defy a physical law, if I step off the roof of a 10-story building, gravity enforces its law instantly.
You hit the pavement.
I hit the pavement. The feedback loop is immediate and undeniable.
True.
But if a society defies these supposed social laws, if they adopt a corrupt, exploitative, hyper-transactional system built by edge dwellers, they don't collapse overnight.
Oh, they don't.
In fact, if we look at history or even the modern global economy, some of the most exploitative empires and corporations look incredibly wealthy, powerful, and successful for decades, sometimes centuries.
They look invincible.
So why the delay? Where is the social gravity? If this is an engineering manual, why doesn't the bridge collapse the second the bad concrete is poured?
That delay is the ultimate illusion, and it is the exact reason why the edge dweller thinks they are winning.
Walk me through it.
The author addresses this brilliantly by differentiating between physical time and social time.
Physical time being the immediate reaction.
Right. You touch a hot stove, your hand burns in milliseconds. The nervous system's feedback loop is designed for immediate, localized survival.
But social laws govern massive, complex networks of human interaction.
Exactly. The days of social law can take generations to unfold. The feedback loop is incredibly vast.
The lecture uses the analogy of stolen milk to explain this, doesn't it?
Yes, and it's a beautifully grounded example. Let's look at it biologically speaking. If a farmer steals fodder to feed his cow, the physical milk that cow produces is still perfectly nutritious.
Right. It still has calcium.
If a corrupt executive uses stolen, embezzled money to buy that milk for his child, the child's physical body still extracts calories, calcium, and protein from it.
The physical laws of digestion do not care about the theft.
Thermodynamics doesn't care if the money was laundered.
But the social law cares deeply.
Because over time, that theft, that normalization of embezzlement, begins to rot the trust, the equity, and the security of the broader community.
The legal system becomes compromised.
The working class becomes disenfranchised and stops producing. Inequality skyrockets.
It might take 3 generations of children drinking that stolen milk before the social fabric tears entirely.
But eventually, the society that normalizes corruption will inevitably collapse into violence, revolution, or abject poverty.
It reminds me of corporate frauds like Enron. For years, they looked wildly successful.
They were on the cover of magazines.
The executives were drinking the finest stolen milk available. The physical reality of their wealth seemed undeniable.
Because the social feedback loop hadn't closed yet, they thought they had outsmarted the system.
They looked at their bank accounts and said, look, we defied the ethical laws of business, and gravity hasn't hit us.
But the text is unrelenting here. Ayat 18 concludes by declaring, whoever the law disgraces, none can honor.
It doesn't matter how many sycophants you surround yourself with.
Or how many PR firms you hire. Or how much stock you artificially inflate.
When the timeline of the social law finally intersects with your reality, the structural collapse is absolute.
You cannot bribe the laws of physics, and you cannot bribe the mechanics of societal collapse.
And this brings in Ayat 17, which the author frames as the ultimate impartial equalizer.
This is a vital point for permanently stripping away religious tribalism from this text.
Let's hear it.
Ayat 17 lists various groups operating at the time: believers, Jews, Sabians, Christians, Magians, and idolaters.
A diverse crowd.
Very. And the text explicitly states that the universal system will judge between them. It does not say it will automatically favor the ones carrying the correct flag.
It completely invalidates the idea of a chosen people based on mere branding.
Absolutely. You cannot hack the system by adopting a specific religious identity while secretly operating a corrupt, exploitative society.
The labels don't matter to the concrete.
Exactly. All communities, regardless of their theological labels, are judged purely by their systemic results and their adherence to universal social laws.
If a group calling themselves believers builds a society reliant on hypocritical edge dwellers and stolen milk,
they will collapse just as surely and just as violently as a completely secular society doing the exact same thing.
because gravity doesn't care about the logo on your shirt.
And neither does the law of civilizational survival.
That is just a razor-sharp way to analyze history. Which brings us to the final act of this systemic breakdown.
The endgame.
Right. If the social laws take time, but their execution is inevitable, what does the final reckoning of a failing system actually look like?
When the delayed feedback loop finally closes, how is the bill paid?
Exactly. And the author turns to Ayat 19 through 21 to explain this climax, detailing these two disputing parties and their respective harvests.
Yes.
And here we run into language that is, frankly, notoriously difficult for a modern secular mind to process.
It gets intense.
The imagery used is sheer horror. Garments of fire, boiling water poured over their heads, melting what is in their bellies and their skins, hooked rods of iron.
Yeah, it's visceral.
I have to push back hard here again. We've been discussing blueprints, tumor analogies, and delayed feedback loops. But this...
It sounds medieval.
It sounds exactly like the medieval, vengeful torture fantasies we promised the listener we were going to avoid today.
I know.
How on earth does an engineer extract a systemic mechanism out of garments of fire?
By refusing to read it as a supernatural dungeon and reading it instead as a precise metaphorical description of systemic consequence.
Walk me through that.
The author emphatically demythologizes this imagery. This isn't a magical deity inventing arbitrary punishments to exact revenge on bad people.
So what is it?
This is the natural thermodynamics of a collapsing society. Let's break down the garments of fire.
Okay.
Think about what happens when a society is built on transactional opportunism, extreme inequality, and hollowed-out institutions. It creates massive, unyielding societal friction.
And friction, over time, creates immense heat.
Exactly. The garments of fire represent the inescapable, suffocating environment of a society tearing itself apart.
Ah, I see.
When the wealth disparity reaches a breaking point, when the edge dwellers have hoarded all the resources and fled, and the load-bearing walls finally crack, the society catches fire.
Civil unrest.
Hyperinflation, where money becomes worthless ash. The breakdown of supply chains, riots in the streets.
These are the garments of fire a corrupt society weaves for itself thread by thread over decades.
And everyone in that society is forced to wear the consequence of their collective structural failure.
Okay, that makes sense. The environment itself becomes hostile. You can't take the garment off because it's the society you live in.
Right.
But what about the boiling water melting what is in their bellies? That feels so specifically punitive.
The author links this directly to the hoarding of wealth and the consumption of that stolen milk we discussed earlier.
Oh, the belly as a metaphor for hoarded assets.
Yes. The belly represents the internal accumulation of corrupt assets. Everything they swallowed up through exploitative means. Their offshore accounts, their hoarded real estate, their false prestige.
It is suddenly exposed to the boiling reality of the collapse.
Exactly. When the currency hyperinflates, the millions you hoarded in the bank literally evaporate. The value is melted away.
The internal rot is melted away, revealing the total structural failure beneath.
The destructive path consumes the society from the inside out. It's not an external punishment imposed by a wrathful king.
It is the built-in mathematical consequence of a flawed design finally executing its final variable.
It's basically just physics.
Let me build an analogy here to really lock this in for the listener, because I think this is the crucial turning point.
I love your analogies. Go for it.
Imagine you are a real estate developer building a massive, gleaming skyscraper in the center of a major city.
Okay, big budget project.
But to save money, maximize your short-term profits, and appease your shareholders, you secretly use cheap, counterfeit steel for the central pillars.
A terrible idea, obviously.
You staff the project with edge dwellers, inspectors, and managers who know the steel is substandard, but take their bonus checks and look the other way.
Transactional participants.
Right. And you cover the whole thing in a beautiful, expensive glass facade. On opening day, it looks like a triumph of modern engineering.
To the untrained eye, it is a massive success story.
Right. But the physical laws of gravity are pulling down on that counterfeit steel every single second of every single day.
And gravity never takes a day off.
For years, the friction is invisible to the people working in the offices, but deep in the core, the steel is slowly warping.
Microfractures are webbing across the pillars.
Exactly. You don't need a wrecking ball to destroy that building. You don't need an invading army or a terrorist attack.
The building's own weight, combined with the relentless, patient timeline of gravity, will inevitably crush it.
And when the pillars finally snap and the building pancakes on itself, shattering the glass and destroying everything inside, you wouldn't stand in the rubble and say, wow, the laws of physics were really angry and vengeful today.
No, absolutely not. You would say the mechanics of consequence played out exactly as designed. The failure was baked into the blueprints on day one.
That is exactly how the author is reading these verses. A society composed of edge dwellers operating on transactional loyalty and stolen resources is a skyscraper built with counterfeit steel.
And the fire and the boiling water are just The dust and the kinetic energy of the inevitable collapse.
So let's synthesize all of this.
Let's bring it home.
We've journeyed from the individual standing nervously on the periphery to the rational miscalculation of false patrons to the sheer physics of envy.
And finally, to the slow, inescapable crush of cosmic social laws.
What is the ultimate architectural thesis of this Taliu Islam lecture? What's the takeaway?
The text sets up a stark binary choice for the future of any civilization.
On one side, you have the edge-dweller society of Ayat 11, which inevitably terminates in the internal inferno of Ayat 19 through 21.
But the author doesn't just leave us in the ashes. The lecture points to the alternative, referencing Ayat 14 and later verses, which describe a constructive, load-bearing society.
And the recurring motif for this successful society is that they are admitted to a flourishing order beneath which rivers flow.
Rivers flowing. It's the ultimate symbol of a constant, sustainable, renewable source of life.
But the key word there, to me, is beneath.
Beneath. Why is that the key word?
Because a river can only flow beneath a structure if that structure has a foundation deep enough and strong enough to span the water without washing away.
Oh, that's beautiful. The overarching lesson for civilizational survival is brutally clear then.
It is. A system that relies on fair weather adherence will inherently collapse under its first real trial.
You cannot engineer a sustainable human civilization on the quicksand of transactional loyalty.
The only thing that can carry a society through the inevitable shakings of history is conviction. Yes, the kind of structural integrity that acts as a titanium pillar.
The kind of commitment that holds its ground when the math looks bad.
When the 1,000 soldiers are marching over the hill.
And when it actually costs you something personal to maintain the wall.
The physical cosmos is already operating flawlessly on this unbreakable law of cause and effect. The sun and the stars are already prostrating.
The universe is structurally sound. We are the only wildcards.
Human beings merely possess the choice to align our societies with the structural integrity of that universal law, to build blueprints based on equity, transparency, and resilience.
Or to flee to the fortunes, hoard our counterfeit wealth, and just wait for the steel to buckle.
It is a choice between engineering a reality that outlasts us or being crushed by the slow, grinding gears of consequence.
It really is that simple.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to ponder.
Something to take away.
Take this diagnostic framework we've built today and apply it to your immediate reality. Look around at the institutions you trust, the companies you work for, and even the social circles you rely on every day.
Look closely at them.
If a true stress test hit tomorrow, a massive economic shock, a crisis of leadership, a moment where the absolute easiest path is the corrupt path, how much of your world is built by people merely standing on the verge?
How many cardboard walls are you leaning?
And more importantly, when the ambient pressure drops and you turn that diagnostic lens inward, are you a pillar capable of bearing the weight of your community?
Or are you just renting space in the margins, hoping the wind doesn't blow?